Welcome back, everybody, as we journey into Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, the set releasing on the 18th of February. I have my caffeine, so let's get started. As always, we will start with the white cards that have been sneak peeked for today. We see Stillkieran, a 3-mana artifact creature, 3/2 flying, and for 5 mana reconfigures to give equipped creature flying and the ability you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. So I think that's a very interesting card. Just first looking at it, whenever you see the effect, oh, you can't lose or your opponents do lose, whenever you see an effect that just states right out the gate, you win or your opponents can't win, it's always a very interesting, almost deserves a double take situation. I think this card is very interesting to talk about. I think it really only is useful in one type of game, and that is when you have a partner and you're playing against 2 other opponents. The reason why I say that is if your opponents are threatening lethal on you, meaning that they are about to take you out on their next turn, you get this card out. You'll need 8 mana to do so, 3 mana to play it, 5 to reconfigure it. But say you do, for 8 mana, you can equip this to a creature that you control and ensure that you're not going to lose on your next turn. Lethal damage or not, you can't lose. So you can be at 0 health or below, but you did not lose. I think that's a very interesting way to be able to buy some time. And given the creature that you equip this to, flying, may also mean that you can feel free to attack with whatever you have on the board without fear of having lost on your opponent's next turn. And the reason why that's really good is there are a lot of times where a game will stall out because you may have the most creatures, but if you attack with enough of them, then you leave yourself open to your opponent swarming you as well. Once you've attacked with a creature, unless it has vigilance, it's not able to block again. So having a card like this out allows you to make more aggressive plays. So long as you use this for that, I think that this is pretty good. But I think most likely this is useful in a 4-player game where your partner is fine, but you're not so fine. So you play this out, keep yourself in the game long enough to be able to maybe establish more of a board presence and then help your partner take back the game. Because once you're eliminated from the game, the odds are 2 against 1, your opponent, both of them will win. Even if your partner takes out one of them, the other opponent has a good shot at being able to take out your partner. So staying in the game as long as you can always benefit your partner just because it gives a second target and another threat on the board. But I think that this could be really interesting to play if you're playing it 1 versus 1 player, if you use it to be very aggressive that turn. So I think that that would be very interesting to see. I think, of course, once you play this card, it's targeted by any opponent you do have, because once they get rid of this, then they can try to win. Maybe they whittle down your health a little bit and they don't worry too much about it until they get closer to the point of winning. This also does a good job at stalling out certain decks that have alternative win conditions too. So if you draw out, you don't have to worry about losing that game until this card is destroyed, that is. So when you go to draw, you don't lose. So this is really good against mill decks where their entire goal is for you to get rid of your entire library. I'm not entirely sure how you could come back from that though, because you're not playing any real creatures on the board. But if you're in a position to where milling out your deck isn't what's going to kill, aside from the fact you lose when you try to draw and you don't have a card, if you play this card and that isn't a problem for you anymore, and you have enough of a board presence to where you can still win, that makes it a very interesting card. I also believe this does a good job at stalling out decks like the Lotus-Filled Combo deck, where the Second Coming of the White Sun, I think it's called, Second Coming of the Sun, or whatever the card is called, there's a card out there where if you play this spell twice, you win the game. So this will stop that from happening. Their entire deck is built on playing that. So you play this card out, and it's a very good, I stalled out your deck, so now you can't win except for the natural way to win. And since their entire deck is built on that strategy, then you have nothing to worry about. They may not even have an answer to your artifact. I think that they probably run a couple in their side deck, and I think really this is a side deck card too in a 1v1 situation. But it's just a very interesting card. There's so many different uses for this card. The more creative you are, I think the better this card is. And I love cards like that. I think that this is one of the ones you just love to talk about. And if you can see it played right, you love to see it played. Even when it's against you, that's a fun card. The only time when this is less fun is if you are running an alternative win condition deck and your entire deck just got stalled out because of one card. But then again, you were probably the one who is playing annoyingly to your opponent at that point if they have to run a card like this to stall you out. So I think that's a very interesting card. I think that the more creative people get with this, the more fun this will be to see in the set. So I can't wait for that. But we got to move on to our next card. So here we go. So the white releases now have their invoke. They may invoke Justice, a 5-mana spell, 4 of which must be white. Sorcery, return target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of creatures and or vehicles target player controls. This is a fantastic card. Heavy devotion to white, so that makes me a little bit nervous. Anytime you see a card with heavy devotion to one color, it's harder to run in a multicolored deck. But this card is returning a permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. It can be an enchantment, it can be an artifact vehicle if you're running it in a vehicle deck. For me, it will be an enchantment. I run this in my white-green deck. I've got a Spirit Samurai deck situation going on. I pull out another Saga enchantment or something that's modifying my creatures on the board because it combos well with modifications. Or I pull back out a legendary creature that unfortunately died. Maybe one that helps me give all my people who are modified trample. Who knows? I think that this is a great card in that. This is a great card in a vehicle deck if you are running a Samurai vehicle deck, which I think is one that they're trying to get you to do. A white-blue deck, you can pull out any number of things. Blue has a lot of enchantments. And of course, you've got a lot of creatures you can pull from that. Vehicles or artifacts, you can pull them back out. So that's already great. And then if I run this in my modification deck, I pull out a Saga enchantment that's helping me modify, or I pull out that creature that gives my modified creatures trample. Well, guess what? I get to distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among my creatures. What's that? I can modify 4 more of my creatures? That's awesome. I'm a little nervous that it's heavy devotion to white, but this is awesome. I've got to try it. Worth a shot. I think this has a lot of utility. Even if you're just pulling a permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield, it may be worth it to run this in a mono white deck where card draw is not quite there usually. I mean, there's a Scry enchantment now you can play for white, but you don't have a lot of ability to pull from your deck aside from certain cards that allow you to pull planes. So this will help you pull from your graveyard at least, and I think that has some use in a mono white, but I think I'm not going to see it in that. I think I'm going to see it in my deck. I can't wait for it. So we'll see how it does. Alright, so that moves us over to Light Pause, Emperor's Voice, a 2-mana card, a 2/2 legendary creature with the effect that reads, whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with mana value less than or equal to that aura, and with a different name than each aura you control, and put that card onto the battlefield, attached to Light Pause, Emperor's Voice, and then of course, you shuffle your library afterwards. For a 2-mana 2/2, stat line's about right. And I think I've just got another addition to my deck. So, I love it. I think you run this in a Emperor modification deck, even if you're doing white-red Samurai vehicle situation. But it being a fox means it doesn't really combo very well. The only thing it synergizes well just because of its creature type is the fact that it's a legendary creature, and this set is showing us a lot of legendary creature benefit, running multiple copies of a legendary in a deck where you don't have to worry about the legendary rule anymore with, I think, Mirror Box that we talked about before, or you've got lands that for each legendary creature you control, this ability costs 1 less. So this does synergize in that specific deck, but this is a good enough card where you run this, I think, in a bunch of different types of decks. So I'm excited about it, and I'm going to try to put it into my Spirit. I've got already a ton of cards listed, ready to go in my deck. All I have to do is get them out of the pack. So I'm excited. Alright, our next one is Norika Yamazaki the Poet, a 3-mana 3/2 Vigilance, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may cast target enchantment card from your graveyard this turn. This is pretty good in a samurai deck. a lot of samurais and warriors, well, samurais really, but a lot of the samurais we're seeing from this set, another samurai warrior attacks alone, you get this benefit. A 3-2 with vigilance is really good because when this card attacks, it won't have to tap, so you can use it to block next turn. So you attack with a modified samurai, you get to cast an enchantment card from your graveyard that turn. If you try to cast an enchantment from your graveyard the turn you play this card, you would pay 3 mana to play this card out, attack with one of your other samurai, and then, aside from the 3 mana you use for this card, the rest of your mana you would keep in reserves to cast the enchantment you want. I could see this being really good in that deck. And for me, I know this is another card that I would try to run in my Spirit Samurai green-white deck where I'm modifying cards, because I need these enchantments out. I need to pull back out my Saga enchantments, everybody. This is going in that deck. But this is also pretty good, I think, in a Samurai vehicle deck. I don't think it's as good in that deck because you're wanting to pull artifacts from your graveyard more than you are trying to pull out enchantments, I think. So this may be more for my kind of idea of the deck that I'm wanting to do, but we'll see. I think it's a good card because I already know where I want it to go, but I think it may not be one of the best samurai we've seen so far, which this is a legendary creature, so of course you're getting good mana value for the card. Of course its effect is pretty good if you can get it to go off. So the goal here is to make this card useful in your deck, of course, but it being a legendary creature, it should not require you to play around or build around this card as much as I think that it requires. I think that you might even throw in a couple extra enchantments, and in that case, is it worth it for this one card? But I already know what I want to use it for, so I'm going to say decent card. The next card we're going to talk about is the Selfless Samurai for 2 mana, a 2-2. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it gains lifelink until the end of the turn, which is already a good card. A 2 mana 2-2, give other creatures lifelink, and you get to change who that is on your turn because you get to pick who you're attacking with. That's a good card. But it also has the ability, sacrifice this card, and another target creature you control gains indestructible until the end of the turn. And that makes this card from okay to amazing. And the reason why is if you are attacking with a modified creature in my deck, or in any samurai deck, then you're playing this card out, attacking with one of your samurai or warriors who have been modified, giving it lifelink. Any damage it deals, you're gaining in life. Your opponents know you can sacrifice this card to give it indestructible and are thus faced with a choice. Do they let that damage just go through? Do they block it with just a little card because you may not have given it trample, and trample is really what you want for a modified creature? If only there was a card that did that. Then if it doesn't have trample, this card is a lot less awesome of a card. So it combos better than it plays by itself. But already a 2 mana 2-2, give something else lifelink, and I think that your opponent will target this card even though it's a little 2-2. They're going to want to kill this card before they start targeting your other cards, because you can just wait until they play something that is going to destroy your creature or deal lethal damage to it, sacrifice this Selfless Samurai, and then you're essentially just saying, no, what you actually did was you destroyed my 2-2 here. So no matter what, they're going to try to target this card first, and that way you don't get to know what card they're trying to target if it isn't already obvious. So I think that's really how this card ends up getting played. You play this as a way to shift targets from a really big creature to a really small creature. And that's something I'm noticing a lot with these samurai, and even with the ninja cards, is that the targets are shifting to smaller targets because, oh my gosh, I need to get rid of this card before I can get rid of one of these other big cards. And I always love being able to do that to my opponent. Like, oh, I get it. I've got a really big card out, but you got to kill this 2-2. You've got to kill this little one. Otherwise, you're not getting rid of the big guy. So I find that to make this card much more interesting. And of course, as with a lot of the cards we've seen so far, this is going in my deck. Can't wait to be able to play with it. And I think in my deck, I run probably 4 copies of Selfless Samurai. Alright, and the last white card that they sneak peeked for us today is the Sky Blessed Samurai, a 7 mana, 6 colorless mana, 1 white, a 4-4 with flying. And it does cost 1 colorless mana less to cast for each enchantment that you control. So, the first question in my mind is, how low of a mana cost does this card need to be at least be worth it? And then how low do I think I can get it? So on my first question, how low do I think it needs to be a worthwhile card? I think I would be happy with this card as a 3 mana card, or as a 4 mana card I should say, 3 colorless, 1 white. So if I can reduce that 6 to a 3, I think I'm happy. I don't want to cast it for more than that. So I need to have 3 enchantments on my side of the board before I play this card. And then I play this on turn 4 ideally, because a turn 4 4/4 with flying is a much bigger threat than a turn 7 4/4 with flying, where I've just spent my whole turn with 7 mana to play a 4/4 with flying and then pass turn. So then, how low do I think how realistically can I get it? Lower? I think enchantment creatures are a thing in this set more so than they used to be. So I think that's your best bet here. I don't think you're really pulling a lot of enchantments. There are cards that pull enchantments from your graveyard. This is also a samurai, so maybe I try to run it in my modification deck where I just run a lot of enchantments anyways. So I think you know what? I think this might be an okay card. But it's really hard to figure that out because as a 7 mana 4/4 with flying, it's a terrible card, which they knew that, which is why it has an ability that reduces its mana cost. I think it's easy enough to get it down 1 mana, so I think 5 colorless and 1 white is at least, you're definitely going to be able to do that. But 6 mana 4/4 with flying is still not worth it. 5 mana 4/4 with flying is only worth it because you might be able to combo it with another samurai. But for me, I never plan on that. I hope for it, and I try to plan to make it happen. But when I evaluate a card as to does it go in my deck or does it not go in my deck, I ask myself how realistic it is to get it to where I need it to be. So I think I do run this in my deck, but I think I run a copy of it in my deck. And it only gets in there because it's a samurai, and flying will be better for me when I attack by itself and use my other effects of whenever a samurai or warrior attacks alone, well, this one has flying, so it's not risking death quite as much as another samurai would. So I think that is what makes it a little bit of a better card. There's not a lot of samurai flying. This is one. You almost have to run it. Maybe I run a second copy of it. I'm just nervous with that high mana cost. So we're going to move on and say overall, okay card. And that moves us to our blue cards. And we will be talking about Essence Capture. So Essence Capture here is a 2 mana instant that counters target creature spell and allows you to put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature that you control. So we're going to go ahead and compare it to another card. Negate, a 2 mana, 1 colorless mana, 1 actual blue mana, counter target, Essence Scatter, that's what we want. So Essence Scatter is a 2 mana, 1 colorless, 1 blue, counter target creature spell. So Essence Capture would be a little bit better than that, but aside from having instead of it being 1 colorless and 1 blue, its devotion is full to blue. And so for that cost, you're getting a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control, and you did counter a creature spell your opponent played. No, I don't think so. I think there are 2 mana spells that cancel spells no matter what they are now. I mean, they're a thing. So I don't think so. I don't think that this card does it for me. Alright, so that moves us to their Invoke. Alright, so the Invoke card for blue is Invoke the Winds. So it is also a 5 mana card, just as all the other Invokes are, and it has heavy devotion to blue, as the other cards that Invoke do. 4 blue, 1 colorless, and you can gain control of target artifact or creature, untap it. So unlike a red card, it's not also giving that card haste, so if it's been affected by summoning sickness, then you cannot use it. But I think for a blue card that it's interesting to gain control of an artifact or a creature temporarily. Most blue cards that gain control are enchantments, so they're permanent, and usually they're about 5 mana. So I think maybe because those cards are old enough to where you can't run them anymore, this ends up being an okay card. But just because I remember those enchantments that are 5 mana and you gain control as an enchantment of target creature, then that makes this a slow card in that sense. The difference here is that you can gain control of an artifact. Maybe an artifact that hurts them if they don't have it, such as if you're playing against a legendary deck where they had Mirror Box out and the legendary rule doesn't apply to them. Well, you can take it, and now it doesn't apply to you. You don't really care about that, but what you care about is that your opponent now has to destroy copies of legendary cards if there's more than one on their side of the board. So I definitely think that in that sense it would be a pretty interesting combo, but I don't think that deck is enough of a threat to run this card. So I think this ends up being I feel like this ends up being used for the creature control. And I guess for 5 mana and it's a sorcery, I guess that is better than an enchantment because they can't destroy a sorcery after you play it. You just gain control of the creature. So, you know what? Alright, I take it back. This card is a good card. 5 mana, as a sorcery, gain control of the target creature artifact, untap it, your sorcery goes away, that creature stays on the side of the board. Most red spells that do it give it haste, but they're also only until end of turn, and most blue spells that do it are enchantments, to where if they destroy the enchantment, they get their creature back, but now they can't. Yeah, alright, this is a great card, and I think you run it in... You don't run it in every blue deck, but it's a good enough blue card where you try to fit this in your deck. I mean, you run it in your side deck, probably. You see if maybe there's a place for it in your blue deck. It's not a good enough card to run in a multicolor deck, because again, these Invoke cards have heavy devotion to their color. So this isn't something that's so worth it you put it in a multicolor deck. But if you're already running a mono blue, I think you run this in it. Alright, and that moves us to Mobiliser Mac, a 2 mana artifact vehicle, a 3/4 with flying, that whenever it becomes crewed, up to one other target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until the end of the turn. So that's really good. If you can crew this vehicle, it crews another vehicle. For 2 mana, you're playing it out, and your next turn is when you're going to want to try to crew it. That way it can attack. So it's 2 mana, 3/4 flying on the board that doesn't do anything until it's crewed. Then your next turn comes around, you crew this, and it crews something else. Yeah, I think you run this in a vehicle deck. It's blue, so it doesn't fit well with the Samurai vehicle red-white. It doesn't fit well in the red vehicle deck, but it's a decent card. So I want to see it in vehicle decks. I think maybe they did pick the wrong color for it, because I haven't predicted yet a blue vehicle deck. I mean, they want it to be blue-white, I think, but I haven't really seen enough of the blue cards make it worth it. Whereas this definitely adds value to putting blue as your vehicle choice. I think red is just a better mix with white. And I don't think you're doing white, red, blue. You could try it, but I think stick to 2 colors on the vehicles might be the better way to go here. But we'll see. And next up is Network Disruptor for 1 mana. An artifact creature, a 1/1 with flying, that whenever this enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. Very normal for a blue deck to be able to tap your opponent's creatures. A 1 mana 1/1 with flying is pretty standard for blue, and then they usually have something else like Scry or something. So I think a 1 mana 1/1 flying tap target permanent may be too slow. I think a 1 mana 1/1 flying Scry 3, Augury Owl, I think... Well, Augury Owl is 2 mana, so this is a mana less. It's good for the mana value, and that usually is enough for me to like a card. I think it's a Moonfolk Rogue. There's not a lot of combos there. It's an artifact creature, so things that can target creatures, that can also maybe something else that targets artifacts. Both of those can target this, but it's probably not worth it to target, so it flies just under the radar. So I definitely think this sees play. I'm less excited about the card because I think you should be getting a little bit more. I know it's a 1 mana card, but I get worried. I mean, you don't want to have to draw this on turn 1 for it to be good. And so I just think of the later game plays for the card. I mean, Augury Owl that I was just talking about is a 2 mana card. It is more expensive than this card, but you play it turn 2, it's really good. You play it turn 8, it's still pretty good. You play this turn 1, it's pretty good. But it needs to be turn 2 of the game, your first turn, because you want to have something to tap. So, yeah, I just think it ends up being too slow. Alright, and that moves us to Prosperous Thief. A 3-mana human ninja, a 3/2. Its ninjutsu is a 2-mana that whenever one or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token. Well, see, this is something that at least combos with the rogues. Okay, so the Moonfolk Rogue combos a little bit with this. So do you run that in a ninja deck? Maybe. This one here, though, just evaluating this one card, is really a 2-mana 3/2 that is going to be creating your treasure token that turn. Because you want to use it for its ninjutsu ability. A 3-mana 3/2 isn't good enough to run, but a 2-mana 3/2 that immediately deals combat damage, and you just need to have a creature that wasn't blocked, that's good. I see this card being a pretty good card to run in that deck. So, yeah. Next up is Cyber Trespassers, a 5-mana 3/5 channel for 4 mana, and you discard it, and you tap up to 2 target creatures that you don't control. Those creatures do not untap during their controller's next untap step. Another Moonfolk Rogue, so it at least combos with the Rogue ability we just saw. But I think it's much too slow to be run in a deck where you want it to be discarded because you don't want to play it. A 5-mana 3/5, that's not worthwhile. So you're wanting to channel this for 4 mana, and I don't want to channel that for 4 mana. So even with the tapping 2 target creatures that you don't control, as useful as that can be in certain situations, I think it's not useful in enough situations. So I'm going to say a not good card. Next is Spell Pierce for 1 mana, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2 colorless mana. Yeah, I think for 1 more mana you can just counter the spell. So if you don't play this early enough, or you hold on to it until your opponent taps all of their mana for this one really cool card, this ends up not being as good. So I think it's probably too slow, but it's not as slow as Essence Capture was. So if we're going to see counter spells, I think we see this one over the other one. And finally, we have Thirst for Knowledge, a 3-mana instant spell. Draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. That's not bad for blue. I see blue running decent artifacts. I think that they're wanting this to be a vehicle deck situation. But draw 3, discard 2 is still good. For 3 mana, you're used to drawing 2 cards with Divination for 3 mana. So draw 3, discard 2, you're netting 1, but you're maybe getting some bad cards out of your hand. I think it's okay. I think it could be a little better, because you definitely want to discard a card. You definitely want to discard that artifact. Draw 3, discard 2 is okay. I'm not excited about it. Draw 3, discard 1 for 3 mana. That's okay too. It's more okay than the other effect was. But again, Divination, 3 mana, draw 2 cards is still better. Draw 3 is almost a little bit better than Scry because you're directly getting it into your hand. So I almost see that 3rd card as beneficial. Is it worth discarding out of your hand for? I don't know, but I think you try to run this. I could see this being good. It's just difficult to evaluate. Blue decks are always difficult to evaluate when you're planning so far ahead. Ideally, you've already set the top few cards of your deck with Scry, so I think that this ends up being an okay card. I definitely think it gets tried out. Whether or not it actually ends up being beneficial to the blue decks, if it slows them down or if it does beat them up, that remains to be seen. I'm going to err on the side of, if I had just taken a guess, it's going to be a little too slow, but even I would probably run it just to see, because I don't want to have said that and then not run a good card in my deck. So that's all the blue cards that they've shown us for today. That moves us to the black cards, and we start with Goshintai of Hidden Cruelty, a 4-mana black spell. It is a shrine, a 2/2 death touch, and at the beginning of your end step, you may pay a colorless mana, and when you do, destroy target creature with toughness X or less where X is the number of shrines you control. Once again, another combo shrine card that I think is too slow. I think that's really my take on a lot of these shrines, is that they're too slow. So I really feel like I'm missing something. It's 4 mana for this, and a 2/2 Death Touch 4 mana isn't worth it. So that effect really does have to be good. So I can't wait to see a shrine deck that works. I'm just not... I can't picture it in my head well enough to say that this card's got to go in that deck, you know? I think that for what it is, I think it's a bad card. So, I mean, I want to see it be good. So let me know what you think. Show me some deck ideas you've got with the cards that we've seen so far. But even running all the shrines we've seen so far, it ends up being a slow card. So, not so good. Now, the black cards that we've seen, they've released a March card. March of Wretched Sorrow. 1 black mana, and then X amount of any other mana. As an additional cost to casting the spell, you may exile any number of black cards from your hand. Spell costs 2 less for each one that you've done that way. Deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, you gain X life. Reminds me of Tendrils of Corruption, where X is a number of swamps that you control, and it deals X damage, you gain X life. Essentially. All of the March cards, much like the Shrine cards, seem a bit slow to me. You don't want to have to exile spells from your, or black cards from your hand, but... and the amount of damage you deal has to be enough to destroy. A planeswalker is not as difficult to kill by dealing direct damage as a creature is. So I think looking at this card, it is more likely that you want to have 4 damage dealt to a planeswalker. I don't see a lot of planeswalkers staying above 4. If you want to be safe, you can go up to 6. So you're looking at tapping a black mana, maybe tapping 2 mana to go with it, exiling 2 cards from your hand, and you get to destroy a planeswalker. That may be a worthwhile cost. And if you can increase the amount of mana you've paid for the spell, and reduce the amount of cards you're exiling, that makes this card even better. You want to pay the mana cost for this, though, I think. I think you don't want to have to exile cards from your hand. And if you can pull that off, this card ends up being really good against a planeswalker. Against a creature, though, I don't think so. I think that this is too slow, too costly to run in a way that's going to destroy a creature. So our next card that we're going to talk about is Nashi Moon Saga's Scion, a 3 mana rat ninja, power 3, toughness 2, ninjutsu 4, and whenever this card deals combat damage to a player, you exile the top card of each player's library, and until the end of the turn, you may play one of those cards. And if you cast a spell this way, you pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So it's more expensive as a ninjutsu, but you're immediately getting off the effect. And it's more expensive as a ninjutsu because you don't need mana to pay for the cards that you're revealing from the top cards of the decks. But paying life is very standard for a black deck. I just hate it. You've got to run cards that let you gain life as well, and there are decks that do really well at that. So I definitely think this sees play, but because I don't like the lose life mechanic ever for paying for stuff, I would never run this card. But I think it sees play, and I think it's probably one of the better cards we've seen for ninjas, just because you pay life and you're able to do that. There are so many cards out there that let you gain life, especially if you do a black-white deck somehow. I mean, that's a pretty natural combo. You gain life while you're paying life for your black spells. So it's probably a really good card. I just don't like it. Don't like paying life for cards. They can get their own life. That's what I say. Alright. And we move on to Soul Transfer, a 3-mana sorcery that allows you to choose one. If you control an artifact and an enchantment, you cast a spell and you may choose both the effects. But if you're not doing that, your choices are exile target creature or planeswalker, or return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. This is a good card. For 3 mana, exile target creature is okay, especially for black that doesn't already do a lot of that. 3 mana, exile target planeswalker. I mean, am I insane or is that good? Return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand for 3 mana. Less good, but if it's a planeswalker you're getting back, really good. So I like this card, and that's without being able to choose both the effects. So if you can control an artifact and an enchantment and have something in your graveyard you just want to get to your hand anyways, planeswalker or not, that secondary effect is good if it's also coming with the first one. So it's a great card without getting its extra little benefit of choosing both the effects, and it's a great card if you can choose both effects. And finally, a card that's been talked about a lot from the sneak peeks for today is You Are Already Dead. 1 mana, destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn, draw a card. It's a great card. Secretly gives something death touch almost is how that reads. You were dealt damage, you may have killed my creature, but it had a poison blade. I love it, and it fits with the ninja theme. I mean, look at the art on this thing. This ninja has clearly cut this ogre in half, the poor thing. So, and how often do you feel sorry for an ogre? I do right now. So I love it. It fits with the ninja theme, fits with the set really well, while also being a good card. You destroyed the creature. You got to draw a card, so the card replaces itself in your hand. You're not losing hand advantage, but you're establishing more board control by getting rid of their stuff. This is a great card. You run, I might be going crazy here, but I think you run 4 copies of it in your deck. So, good card. And that does it for the black cards. We're going to stop the video here, and we will pick up on the green cards. They did not release any red cards in the sneak peek for today. So we're going to pick up on green. I'll see you there.